Excuse me, I have a question. The camera policies with the officers, when are they to use those cameras? And could you go over for the youth, maybe explain to them how they have the First Amendment constitutional right to film officers while they have interactions with these officers, and how important it is that just because the officers have cameras, that they should not be lazy and just take it for granted and not film those officers as well. If you could explain how, or maybe even do some role playing on how the youth should interact with the officer when filming the officer, just to protect themselves.
So the question is around filming. Okay, so let me first talk about our policy on body-worn cameras, and then I'll talk about your rights on when you can use your phone to video. So to begin with, you may notice now on the patrol officers out there or not, I don't know, but we have the right in the center of the body. I was going to say it's about the size of a pager, but you have no idea what it is. I just stated myself. Yeah, flip phone, that's even that. So anyway, it's carried in the center of their chest, and it's on all of our patrol officers. Okay, so we implemented it. You're seeing more and more police departments go to body-worn cameras because that is the future of police departments. Eventually, I do believe everybody will have them across the country. So the police officers are to turn them on during for example, everything we've talked about here, a contact. Okay, so it's if they're going to stop somebody on the street, they have to turn it on. If they're going to do a traffic stop, if any kind of encounter that would reasonable suspicion would cause the officer to want to stop somebody, or if they're out of the car contacting a citizen. And they're typically to turn them on for calls too, but there are certain times where the officer does have discretion. I'll give you an example. If it's a sexual assault, okay, so it's a victim of a crime, or there are certain times where we don't want that on there are privacy issues too, inside homes, things like that. So let's go to where you are videoing, okay, or people videoing with their cell phones. If you're in a legal place, you're not interfering with the officer, you can absolutely film the officers, okay? So we've seen, and I'll just speak straight, we've seen some videos across all over the place where you see fewer of them, but still, where the officer will put their hand out and swat, don't film me, you know, in a public place. But you can't interfere with the officer either. So I've seen where some will stand on a sidewalk and they're watching some sort of police action going on, and they're videoing the cameras. And if my officers don't think that's just the way life is now, then that's a problem. They have to assume they're being filmed all the time, and they're also filmed with their body cameras. But what you can't do is get right up in their face and interfere in what's going on. And it just makes sense. So sometimes we can talk law, we can dig into the specifics of the law, but some of it just comes down to what makes sense. And I think you would all understand that if you're interfering and getting right in the officer's way, they need some space to do what they do too, especially until the incident is over and done with. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of video, and when you can do it. Aaron?
This is not based on videoing, but say you were in a confrontation with an officer and nothing transpired, but you felt like the officer was unjust in how he approached you, and handled the situation very disrespectfully, and you felt like you were in how would you file a complaint or something to have that officer be accounted for and dealt with properly?
Great question. I'm glad it came up actually, because I'm going to incorporate one other quick thing in there too, which is the importance of, we talk a lot about rights, and it's important for you to know your rights. And I believe in the criminal justice system. That's why we are a system, and we have to have the public defender's office and the prosecutor's office, and so it's all there for a reason. Same thing. And it's important for us all to tell you your rights. But then it's also important to know your responsibilities. We talked a little bit about, like, there's some myths out there that you can just walk away from a police officer when they're trying to stop you. Apply, and then you can file a complaint afterwards. So how do you do that? Okay, so there's online, there's information on filing a complaint. The best way is to come down and talk to a watchman. So I have 24/7 lieutenants, they're managers, that are there to take complaints and investigate those complaints, and they screen them. And if they then go up to a unit called Internal Affairs, the Professional Standards Bureau. So I have staff up there, about 5 people, and that's all they do. All they do is either investigate complaints of misconduct or do audits to make sure that, spot checks to make sure the officers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So did that answer? Oh,
And I would encourage you, probably Miriam as well, to make your complaints. Because what Miriam touched on earlier is when we get that next case where the client is saying, hey, this police officer did me wrong, and we get access to the internal file and there's nothing there, it does no good. And then I agree with Chief Jones with the one small exception. It is legal to resist arrest if there is no legal reason to arrest you. Okay, now should you do that? That's a moral dilemma that you're going to have to toil with yourself. Because at the end of the day, the police are going to arrest you, okay, if you're in that situation. And the only time that you're actually going to receive any sort of relief is in the court system, which is days later after you've been arrested and probably booked into jail for a while. And so what I would say is, if you believe that you're being arrested illegally, do you have the right to resist? Yes. And then,
Basically, what good is that going to do, right?
and then if it's
Follow
a,
up back here to something that was said earlier.
Yes, my question, my 4 children are here. I just need clarification on what Dana was saying, and maybe Chief Jones can filter. I heard something that kind of troubled me, and I need clarification on it. I heard you say that they can resist arrest.
you can legally resist an unlawful arrest.
Correct. So I have a little problem with that, because as you talk about the process of when it gets into your office or into the DA or things like that, my total interest right now is the point of contact between an officer and a civilian. And so I want to make sure, because my kids are hearing this, and as Chief Jones mentioned, there are biases. For me, beyond biases, it's the issue of authority. It's the issue of, we can all have biases, but we live in a society where there's questions on, do I have to listen to authority? And you gave the scenario of the officer putting the hand on the civilian to stop them. Some people are going to turn around, since they put their hand on the young person. The young person is going to react, and then it becomes a conflict in terms of the young persons think that they put their hand on them first, and an officer doesn't want anyone putting their hand on them. And so before we use terms like they can resist arrest, because I don't want my kids to hear that. I want my kids to hear what the process is in terms of a confrontation with an officer and how to diffuse a situation. Because my young people and kids here, they can resist. Resist, where we come from, our definition means they can fight back. And that's a dangerous thing to put out there. So please clarify that for me and for my kids in terms of a point of contact with an officer. Resisting can mean asking for their badge. Resisting can mean a whole different process. So please clarify that for me.